At the age of 24, James Dean once revealed the names of male actors in classic Hollywood with whom he secretly had relationships, and not all of them were sweet memories. Imagine a young man with sad, melancholic eyes, tousled hair, and a captivating smile. Yet behind that charm lay hidden corners of darkness that old Hollywood tried at all costs to keep secret. We will look deep into Dean's life, from a childhood marked by wounds to secret same-sex romances, and how the conservative society of that era forced stars to live in shadows, wearing masks of sacrifice to survive under the dazzling but cold neon lights of Tinseltown. This is not only a story about forbidden love, but also a profound lesson about acceptance, forgiveness, and humanity's long journey toward diversity and equality in the understanding of sexuality. James Dean is a name many already know through classic films such as Rebel Without a Cause or East of Eden. He was born on February 8, 1931 in the small town of Marion, Indiana, United States. Dean grew up in an ordinary family, but his life was soon overshadowed by tragedy. As the only child of Mildred Marie Wilson and Wynton Dean, he first experienced a peaceful childhood in Indiana. His father worked as a farmer, tending wide fields of corn beneath the vast sky of the American Midwest. Mildred, his mother, was the only person who truly understood and nurtured his artistic soul. She encouraged Dean to write down his dreams in old notebooks, taught him to play the violin with gentle classical melodies, the bongo with lively beats, tap dancing with brisk steps, and ballet with poetic grace. From as early as 4 or 5 years old, Dean was cherished by his mother in this way. She often called him her little Jimmy, and that bond was the one true light, the spiritual support during the family's years of financial hardship. When Dean was 6, the family moved to Santa Monica, California. His father Wynton gave up farming to study and become a dental technician at a veterans hospital, hoping to provide a better life on the sunny and windy West Coast. But then tragedy came suddenly and cruelly. In 1940, when Dean was only 9 years old, his mother Mildred passed away from uterine cancer after only a few months of illness. The loss struck him like a thunderbolt. His father, Wynton, could not manage the grief of losing his wife while working long hours. He decided to send Dean to live with his Aunt Hortense and Uncle Marcus Winslow on their farm in Fairmount, Indiana. On the Winslow farm, Dean was raised by strict Quaker relatives who instilled in him discipline, manual labor, and family duties. The wound deepened further when Wynton enlisted in World War II, remarried a woman named Ethel Cassis, and gradually distanced himself from his son. After finishing high school in 1949, Dean returned to California. There he clashed with his father once more. Wynton wanted his son to study law, seeking a steady and secure career as a lawyer. Dean, however, longed for the stage, for cinema, and for the intoxicating glow of the spotlight. In Fairmount, he began to look for fatherly guidance in Reverend James Dare, a local Methodist pastor whose eccentric way of life made him a peculiar but lasting influence on Dean. Reverend James Dare was considered strange because of his unusual hobbies. He collected skulls, told ghost stories, and introduced Dean to dangerous passions such as bullfighting through books, car racing, and other risky pursuits. At first, their bond seemed to be a mentor and student friendship. But later accounts from friends and biographers suggested that this relationship may have involved sexual abuse, beginning when Dean was only 11 or 12. Dean would later confide this secret pain to Elizabeth Taylor, his co-star in the film Giant. Taylor carried the burden for her entire life, and only after her death in 2011 was it revealed that she had kept Dean's secret. Biographers such as Kevin Sessoms, along with reports spanning from 2011 to 2025, confirmed Reverend Dare's involvement. From here we enter the most debated part of his story, James Dean's hidden sexuality. After high school in 1949, Dean moved back to California to follow his father's wish of studying law. He lasted only a few months before dropping out, then switched to drama at the University of California, where his true passion began to emerge. At one of the campus auditions, Dean met William Bast, who would later become a screenwriter. They shared a dorm room, and what began as companionship turned into a complicated romance that stretched across 5 years. Bast would eventually write Dean's first biography but held back intimate details until 2006. During this time, Dean also met Rogers Brackett, a successful radio director 35 years old with a deep commanding voice. Dean was only 20 when their relationship began, and Brackett quickly assumed the role of a protective father figure, offering guidance and affection that Dean had long been searching for. Rogers Brackett quickly became more than just a lover to James Dean. He took the young actor to upscale restaurants like Chasen's where steaks were served to perfection, dressed him in fine clothes from Rodeo Drive boutiques, and introduced him to the influential figures of Hollywood. In 1951, they shared a luxury apartment in Los Angeles with a sweeping view of the Pacific Ocean. While Brackett was known for relationships often labeled as gay for pay, to Dean he was both mentor and guide, the one who helped him step into the treacherous world of entertainment. When asked about living with a well-known gay man, Dean's response was evasive. He said, "Yes, I know, but I have my own room," a defensive remark that left more questions than answers. Some biographers, including Venable Hiernan, accused him of being Brackett's kept boy, financially supported in return for intimacy, a practice not uncommon in Hollywood at the time. A year later, Brackett moved to Chicago for work, leaving Dean with a sense of abandonment that echoed earlier losses, from his mother's death to his father's rejection and the abuse of Reverend Dare. Yet Brackett did not leave him with nothing. He urged Dean to go to New York, even financing his travel, housing, and tuition at the actor's studio. There, Dean studied method acting under the guidance of the legendary Lee Strasberg, teacher of Marlon Brando. With William Bast by his side, Dean delved into New York's restless nights, frequenting underground jazz clubs filled with smoke and music. In Greenwich Village, he met Eartha Kitt, the singer who would later become Catwoman, and writer John Gilmore, who shared in his late-night escapades. Dean and Gilmore experimented with sexuality in small apartments, and Gilmore later wrote in The Real James Dean that they were bad boys playing bad boy games, exploring Dean's bisexuality. Gilmore believed Dean leaned strongly toward men, describing him as more gay than bi, noting Dean's own moments of sexual uncertainty. At the actor's studio, Dean encountered Paul Newman. Instantly drawn to Newman's blue eyes and disarming smile, he suggested performing a love scene in class to shock the room. Newman laughed it off, saying, "Take it easy." But Dean pursued him further. Brackett later told biographer David Dalton that Dean confessed to an encounter with Newman in the shadows of an abandoned building, where the danger of being caught added to the thrill. Dean's obsession grew even more intense when Marlon Brando gave a guest lecture. Idolizing Brando for his performance in A Streetcar Named Desire, Dean began imitating him, from the leather jacket to the husky voice, even buying a motorcycle to match. Friends said he called Brando's house repeatedly and once slept outside his door in Greenwich Village. Brando himself remarked that Dean seemed to be wearing my wardrobe from last year and using my talent from last year, later suggesting a psychiatrist but admitting Dean's work improved under his fixation. Their relationship, however, was built on darker desires. Brando indulged in sadomasochism, and Dean submitted to it. His coroner later noted scars across his body from cigarette burns, marks of his willingness to endure pain for intimacy. Natalie Wood, his co-star and brief girlfriend from Rebel Without a Cause, said this was the reason they ended things. Jimmy sometimes wanted to hurt his partners, she recalled, and I could not take it. She remembered him breaking down during night shoots, speaking of his painful childhood and leaving her shaken with sympathy. By 1954, despite his efforts, James Dean was still struggling to break through in Hollywood. James Dean began his career with small appearances, from Pepsi commercials to playing John the Baptist in a television Easter program in classical costume. He had brief cameos in films such as Has Anyone Seen My Gal? In an uncredited role, Sailor Beware alongside Dean Martin, and Fixed Bayonets. As a soldier. Thanks to Rogers Brackett, he also found work in New York, performing on radio and on CBS television in shows like Kraft Television Theater. His Broadway debut came in 1952 with See the Jaguar, but the weak script caused it to close after only a few weeks. During this early period, Dean was involved with Bob Stevens, a CBS director just starting his career. According to James Sheldon in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Stevens and Dean had a brief affair that gave the young actor some opportunities in television. Still, it was not television or radio that brought him recognition but the 1954 Broadway production of The Immoralist. In this play, Dean portrayed a young gay man seducing tourists, a role that echoed his own private life. The New York Times praised his performance, and with such acclaim, Brackett encouraged him to return to Hollywood. Soon after, Elia Kazan cast him in East of Eden, adapted from John Steinbeck's novel about two brothers, Cain and Abel. Kazan was often frustrated with Dean, calling him a little monster in his diary, but he still gave him the role of Cal Trask, a rebellious son yearning for his father's love. The character reflected Dean's own painful relationship with his father Wynton, and his portrayal earned him a posthumous Oscar nomination in 1956. Audiences were moved by his natural performance, especially the scene where Cal breaks down after his father rejects the money he earned from beans. With momentum from East of Eden, Nicholas Ray cast him in Rebel Without a Cause, a film that became the ultimate portrait of teenage disillusionment in 1950s America. In this film, Dean played Jim Stark, a troubled teenager trying to find meaning in a new town while facing family conflict and peer pressure. The cast included Natalie Wood as Judy and Sal Mineo as Plato. One of the most iconic sequences is the chicken run, where cars speed toward a cliff under moonlight, a haunting symbol of reckless youth. Ray later said that Dean embodied rebellion itself, capturing the feelings of a generation torn between materialism and spirituality. Tragically, Dean died before the film's release, and his performance became immortalized in legend. The success of Rebel Without a Cause was massive, both financially and culturally. Sal Mineo recalled, "Jimmy was sensitive, he cried real tears in scenes about broken families, and we often spoke of loneliness." Dean's final film was Giant, directed by George Stevens and adapted from Edna Ferber's novel. He starred as Jet Rink, a poor farmer who rises to become a wealthy oil tycoon, alongside Elizabeth Taylor as Leslie and Rock Hudson as Bick. The 3-hour epic explored class divides and racial tensions in Texas, filmed against the vast landscapes of Marfa. On set, Dean clashed with Hudson due to their contrasting temperaments but grew very close to Taylor, to whom he confided the painful memories of his past, even seeing her as a mother figure. His role as Jet was perhaps his most layered performance, portraying a man who gains wealth but loses love and belonging. In the haunting final scene, Jet drunkenly addresses an empty chair, a stark symbol of loneliness and emptiness that mirrored Dean's own struggles. The success of Giant earned James Dean his second Oscar nomination, sealing a legacy built on only 3 films within just 18 months. Yet off-screen, his private life troubled Hollywood studios. In the 1950s, under the strict Hays Code that banned portrayals of homosexuality, actors were forced to hide. Rock Hudson staged a marriage with Phyllis Gates to protect his career, and Dean was similarly presented as an eligible bachelor, often photographed with actresses at the suggestion of agent Henry Wilson. But in reality, many of his closest relationships were with men, and gossip magazines like Confidential used such rumors for blackmail. During East of Eden, Dean had a long affair with Geraldine Page, even as he was living with William Bast, creating one of Hollywood's strangest love triangles. Publicly, he was linked to women such as Terry Moore, Ursula Andress, and Liz Sheridan, who later wrote a book about their time together. Marilyn Monroe once admitted she thought of marrying him but believed they would destroy each other because of their instability. Many actresses of that era, as James Sheldon pointed out, claimed romances with Dean simply to raise their own profiles. The most famous relationship was with Italian actress Pier Angeli, star of The Silver Chalice. She was pressured into marrying Vic Damone while still involved with Dean, a move biographers like Paul Alexander called a publicity cover-up by MGM. Years later, Angeli admitted Jimmy was my only love, and her suicide in 1971 left behind a note expressing regret over him. Directors also weighed in. Elia Kazan doubted Dean's success with women, writing that his relationships were full of suspicion and jealousy. Nicholas Ray claimed Dean often visited gay bars in New York, and his affairs included actors like Clifton Webb and Jack Simmons. When asked directly, Dean famously replied, "No, but I will not go through life with one hand tied behind my back," a statement many saw as an open acknowledgement of bisexuality. He even avoided military service in 1951 by admitting homosexuality during a medical exam, a common tactic during McCarthyism. On screen, his performances carried an androgynous sensitivity that made him an LGBT icon. In Rebel Without a Cause, the bond between Jim Stark and Plato, played by Sal Mineo, hinted at homosexuality and sparked censorship in several states. This clashed with the conservative image of masculinity embodied by stars like John Wayne and Clark Gable. Biographer Val Holley noted this paradox, with gay affairs often tied to career advancement and straight ones staged for appearances. In 1997, Elizabeth Taylor described Dean as undecided, reminding people that he died at only 24. She insisted he liked women and recalled how he often cried in her arms, seeing her as a maternal figure. For those who lived in that era, his story reflects a time when homosexuality was criminalized, when the Hays Code controlled films, and when actors risked both prison and career loss if exposed. On September 30th, 1955, Dean's life ended in tragedy. Driving his Porsche 550 Spider, nicknamed Little Bastard, to a race in Salinas, he collided with Donald Turnipseeds Ford at the intersection of Highways 41 and 46 near Chelam, California. He died instantly at the age of 24 with a broken neck. His mechanic Rolf Wutherich survived with severe injuries. News spread rapidly on radio and in newspapers, fans gathered weeping at the crash site, and ticket sales for Rebel Without a Cause and Giant skyrocketed, transforming him into a legend overnight. Over the decades, Dean's influence extended beyond cinema. Musicians like the Eagles honored him in their song James Dean, calling him too fast to live, too young to die, while David Bowie drew from his image for the Ziggy Stardust persona. His red jacket in Rebel and Levi's 501 jeans became timeless fashion staples, inspiring designers from Gucci to Prada socially. He embodied 1950s youth rebellion, paving the way for the counterculture of the 1960s and the sexual freedom movement. In Giant, the role of Jet Rinks symbolized America's changing landscape, from poverty to oil wealth, while addressing racism and class divides. Taylor remembered how Dean often stayed awake all night preparing, once telling her acting is the loneliest profession because you live in other people's roles. That loneliness reflected his own life, from an abandoned childhood to the artificial world of Hollywood. Later critics like Vito Russo and The Celluloid Closet highlighted the queer undertones in Rebel, with Minio's Plato as one of the first sympathetic gay characters in American cinema. Dean's subtle defiance of gender norms, such as wearing pink in Rebel, challenged rigid expectations of masculinity. His death, though tragic, marked the beginning of an enduring legend. Today, Fairmount, Indiana, his hometown, honors him with museums, annual festivals, and a grave at Park Cemetery that draws thousands of fans leaving flowers and letters. Films like Rebel Heart, a 2025 biopic about his romance with Bast starring Brandon Flynn, show how far society has come since the days of secrecy and stigma. More than 65 years later, James Dean remains a symbol of youth, rebellion, and the ongoing struggle for authenticity in a world that often demands masks. His words still echo today: dream as if you'll live forever. Live as if you'll die today.